I wish it need not have happened in my time. So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. This exchange between Frodo Baggins and Gandalf the Grey, held in the Mines of Moria, is one of these standout lines in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and one I think of often. Lord of the Rings itself, and the world of Middle-earth that J.R.R. Tolkien created, has become a seminal work of the high fantasy genre, and a favorite of many around the world. And in the Soviet Union, it was not only popular, but also illegal. I'm your host David, and today we are going to look at the history of Lord of the Rings and the Soviet government. This is the Cold War. Have you ever started to make a change in your life but found it difficult to keep up with, only to fall back into old habits? Well, I know I have, which is why I am thrilled with the sponsor of today's video, Fabulous. Fabulous is an app that makes it easy to develop and stick to healthy habits thanks to science-backed daily routines. Building new habits is hard, but Fabulous gives you guidance on where and how to start a new habit, as well as motivates you to keep going by creating a journey and then coaching you along it. And if you need guidance on where and how to start, take advantage of guided habit coaching. Fabulous will help you use programs to reach your objective, develop your motivation, and discover wellness best practice. Fabulous lets you build healthy habits that stick by helping you create long-lasting changes to your daily routine. And best of all, it lets you do this at your own pace. Unlike other self-development apps, Fabulous is gentler and more rewarding with a fun and more supportive approach. Have your own coach in your pocket, build your ideal daily routine, and make it stick starting today. The first 100 people who click on the link will get 25% off a Fabulous subscription. Our thanks to Fabulous for sponsoring this episode. Okay, so before we can talk about Tolkien, I want to give a huge shout out to one of our sister channels, Wizards and Warriors, a channel dedicated to covering the battles and politics of the sci-fi and fantasy worlds, including that of Middle-earth. And with that established, I should give you also a bit of context on how publishing worked in the Soviet Union. And we'll start that where we start a lot of stories, with Stalin's consolidation of power. The totalitarian Soviet state exerted power over all aspects of life and society, including, as you would expect, literature. The publication of works by both Soviet authors as well as translations of foreign works was the responsibility of Glavlit. Okay, so let's clarify a little. The physical publication of works was done by the State Committee for Publishing, or Goskomizdat. That's the printing presses and distribution and whatnot. They were also responsible for the censorship of political ideas in fiction works. Glavlit, which originally started as the Main Administration for Literary and Publishing Affairs in 1922, and then went through several name changes, finally named the General Directorate for the Protection of State Secrets in the Press, was responsible for identifying works which were anti-Soviet, that revealed military secrets, could incite political, religious, or nationalist unrest by means of deceitful claims, and the like. The work performed by Glavlit was certainly a reflection of the Soviet political climate at any given time. During Stalin's reign, it was extremely prohibitive, while during the time of the thaw under Khrushchev, it was more mild. The Brezhnev era saw a return to more restrictions, but not as severe as those under the Vozhd. During this time, plenty of non-Soviet works of literature were translated and published, but one author of note that remained banned through most of the Cold War period was a favorite of many fans of fantasy, J.R.R. Tolkien. Despite this ban, however, he had a loyal and dedicated fan base. So to understand why Frodo and his little trip to return some lost jewelry to Mordor was illegal, a bit more background is needed. Since the 1930s, socialist realism had become the dominant style of literature, art, sculpture, and other forms of the creative arts in the Soviet Union. Socialist realism, different from social realism, by the way, was a style in which the Soviet reality and the lives and work was supposed to be realistically portrayed. Those depictions had to be not only understandable to the masses, but also had to be supportive of Soviet ideals. Artists, including authors, who refused to comply with these demands could face being cancelled by the state. Authors who refused to comply with the demanded requirements would not have their works published and could find themselves expelled from professional unions such as the Union of Writers, the Union of Artists, and so on. And a similar fate could and would befall translators who proposed the translation of works deemed to be anti-Soviet, or even went ahead and clandestinely translated works without permission. So, what types of books found themselves banned? Well, it could be a wide net, including Russian language books, and it included works which are now considered to be classics. Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago and Mikhail Bulgakov's Master and Margarita were both banned, as were George Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm. And by the way, if you've never read Master and Margarita, you need to change that. It's among the best books written in the 20th century. But I digress. Included in the banned list of books was, curiously, Lord of the Rings. And why would the Soviets ban a seemingly innocuous piece of high fantasy? Well, it had to do with suspicions about the genre in general, but the perceived allegories in the book itself. Was Tolkien referring to Stalin when writing about Sauron? Were the pastoral hobbits an allegory for country gentry or peasant kulaks? Was Mordor meant to represent an industrialized and powerful Eastern nation fighting against the Western powers, ruled by hereditary monarchies? Tolkien himself said on many occasions that Lord of the Rings didn't have any hidden meanings and asked people not to look for them in his writing, but I guess the message never made it to Moscow. Despite this, Soviet censorship was suspicious of everything coming from the West by default, and it was easier to err on the side of caution and ban the work, just in case. The position taken by the censors was that The Lord of the Rings was contrary to the party line and was a pessimistic tale totally against the tenets of socialist realism. And they had a point. A fantasy novel with wizards and hereditary monarchs as heroes was against everything that Soviet propaganda tried to instill in the people. But despite this official opposition to the work, there were still Tolkien enthusiasts in the Soviet Union who looked for ways to translate it and bring it to a larger audience. This was centered around the prominent Soviet translator Zinaida Bobier, who was renowned for her science fiction translations, which included works by Isaac Asimov, Stanislav Lem, Edmund Hamilton, and Robert Heinlein. Understanding that it would be extremely difficult to get permission for the translation of a fantasy novel, Bobier came up with a rather ingenious solution. She condensed the work into one single book and then restructured it so that it was a work of science fiction. Glavlit was mostly tolerant of science fiction as it portrayed a future that was shaped by scientific and technological progress, concepts which remained ideologically safe in the Soviet Union. So, what did Bobier do? Well, she added 5 scientists to the story: an engineer, a physicist, a chemist, a cyberneticist, and a coordinator. They were conducting research on an archaeological artifact, a ring. The ring turned out to be a data storage device, and as Bobier's scientists conducted their research, the story of Frodo, Gandalf, Aragorn, and the Lord of the Rings is told. Not a bad little workaround. And not the first time reworks had been done to evade the censors. Alexei Tolstoy had transformed Pinocchio into Buratino, and Alexander Volkov had remade The Wizard of Oz into The Wizard of the Emerald City. Bobier presented her translation in 1966 to the magazine Technika Młodzieży, or Technology for Young People. Despite the rework, publication was declined. But where there is an appetite for something, a way is found to consume it. Bobier's translation, titled The Tale of the Ring, began to make its way around in samizdat format. Samizdat was a type of homemade, makeshift publication and distribution of usually illegal work that was persistent throughout the Soviet Union. Because of its homemade nature, usually on typewriters using onion paper, and then passed by hand from person to person, there emerged a small but incredibly loyal group of Tolkien fans. So, samizdat copies of The Tale of the Ring began to circulate. Because of the possible persecution that could result from being found with the book, people would often read it in a single day and then pass their copy along. As more people became exposed to the story, however, interest grew in a translation of the original story without the sci-fi spin. These were translations done without permission, mind you, done from enthusiasm for the work, and with the full knowledge that people were risking their careers conducting illegal translations. By 1975 or 1976, the entire trilogy had been translated by Alexander Grusberg, considered the first full translation to be conducted. Around the same time, however, another full translation had been done by Natalia Grigorieva and Vladimir Gushetsky. Both versions circulated in samizdat format. Naturally, the KGB did eventually find out about this, and in the 1980s, the KGB took an interest in Grusberg, summoning him to the branch offices in Perm for questioning. He was at this time threatened with the possible loss of his translating job. Incidentally, while Lord of the Rings was banned, Tolkien's The Hobbit was not. A passage from the 7th chapter of the book was published as early as 1969 in Anglia, a British Foreign Service journal made for distribution in the Soviet Union. The journal itself was part of the official cultural exchanges between the United Kingdom and the USSR throughout the Cold War. It only took 7 years for a full and official translation of The Hobbit to be produced. There was some modification, including the removal of passages that were deemed possibly anti-Soviet. Somewhat amusingly, at least to your host, is the altering of the compass rose on the illustration of Thror's map. While the original illustration had east at the top, pointing towards Smaug the Dragon, Mikhail Belominsky's redrawn version reverted to north, being at the top of the compass. Now, with The Hobbit, not only was it published officially in 1976, but the year after, stage performances of the story began to be performed. In 1977, the Shelgunov Theater in Leningrad put on an adaptation called The Ballad of Bilbo Baggins, not to be confused with the Leonard Nimoy version, by the way. By 1985, The Hobbit had even been adapted for Soviet television, with Leningrad TV casting prominent movie stars for the role, including Zinovy Gert and Igor Dmitriev. So, Tolkien was becoming a known entity. His name appeared in the Soviet encyclopedias and in literary journals. In 1975, the first diploma thesis on Tolkien's work, including Lord of the Rings, was written in the Soviet Union. Seemingly, the government was softening its position towards the English writer, this despite the continued ban on an official translation and the harassment of anybody found violating the ban. This more relaxed approach to the book resulted in the first officially translated version of The Lord of the Rings appearing in 1982. Okay, well, it was only the first part, The Fellowship of the Ring, but this was a start. The translators, Vladimir Muravyov and Andrei Kistyakovsky, produced a condensed version of Fellowship, which was published by Detskaya Literatura, Children's Literature, a prominent Moscow publishing house. Kistyakovsky and Muravyov did remove some passages which were perceived as being ideologically sensitive or could be seen as being anti-Soviet. They also took some creative liberties in their approach to the translation in order to make the book more acceptable or relatable to Soviet audiences. For example, Frodo Baggins was renamed Frodo Torbins, with torba being a Russian word for a bag. The Shire, a word with deep connections to the land history of England, was renamed Hobbitania. The book was titled Hraniteli, meaning guardians, watchmen, or keepers, and the first print run of 100,000 copies sold out incredibly quickly. So fast, in fact, that the publishing house made an unprecedented decision to do another print run. Don't forget, in a planned economy, resource allocation was arranged sometimes years in advance. This was a monumental decision. The additional 200,000 copies also quickly sold out, truly a testament to just how popular Tolkien was with the readers in the Soviet Union. So, you would assume that based on the success of Hraniteli, that the next two books would be expedited to reach an eager public. But this is where Cold War politics gets involved. It was right around this time frame that Ronald Reagan, some people's favorite Cold Warrior, made several speeches referring to the Soviet Union as an evil empire. It's entirely unclear if Reagan was making a reference to Lord of the Rings or to Mordor, but that is exactly how it was interpreted in Moscow. The old views on the book reasserted themselves. Mordor was the Soviet Union, an industrialized empire in the East, fighting an alliance in the West. Official translations, once again, became impossible. What resulted was a popular author with works not officially available, which naturally led to unofficial translations being made and spread via samizdat. These unofficial translations were done by both amateurs like Alina Nemirova, Valeria Maturina, and Nadezhda Chertkova, as well as professional translators such as Grigoriev and Grushetsky, Volkovsky and Afinigenov, and Karik and Kamenkovich. With so many translations in circulation, nomenclature in the book became somewhat confused. Frodo's name appeared as Baggins, Turbans, and even Sumkins, with Sumka being another Russian word for bag. And then the massive changes of the 1980s began. With the ascension of Gorbachev as Soviet leader came an attempt to reform and liberalize the USSR, Perestroika and Glasnost. The role that Glavlit held diminished significantly, and with that, samizdat, long viewed as criminal or dangerous work, began to be seen more as simply unpublished work. Obstacles and bans that had prevented work from being translated were lifted, and this included Lord of the Rings. 1988 saw the full translation and publication of The Fellowship of the Ring using the translation that had been done by Muriev and Kistyakovsky. No redactions. Kistyakovsky had died in 1987, but Muravyev went on to translate and publish The Two Towers in 1990, and finally The Return of the King in 1992. The 1990s also saw publication of other non-official translations of the books. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention the 1991 TV production of Hraniteli that aired once on Leningrad TV and was then presumed lost. It, however, then resurfaced 30 years later in 2021 and has really taken YouTube by storm. While lacking the polish and technical effects of the Peter Jackson movies, Hraniteli has captured many with not only its sincerity, but just a different interpretation of Tolkien's work. Go check it out if you haven't seen it. It's a bit of a trip. Now, the Soviet Union being the Soviet Union, even with official permission, and as late as 1991, the official interpretation of Tolkien's work was one of criticism. The Great Encyclopedic Dictionary referred to Lord of the Rings as, quote, a pessimistic conception of inevitable impact of evil on the historical development. Some people just don't like Tolkien. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and to make sure you don't miss all of our future episodes, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have forged a bell button in secret. One button to rule them all, one button to find them, one button to bring them all, and in the darkness, bind them. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our patrons, since without your help, none of this would be possible week after week. If you aren't a patron, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com, and we're active on Facebook and Instagram at The Cold War TV. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, I will leave you with the words of JFK. In the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal.